That was in February, 1845. During the following May, Davis and Livingston met, in Bridgeport, William Fish. Bow. About the 1st of the following August the clairvoyant, having previously announced that he was to begin a series of readings on the cosmos and the destiny of man, chose Dr. Leon as the conductor and Mr. Fishbaugh as the scribe. The readings were given in New York, and there were 157 of them in all, given between November 28, 1845, and January 25, 1847, a period of 14 months. In the same year the results were published by Dr. Leon and Mr. Fishbaugh. Thus went the story of Andrew Jackson Davis, as told in Mr. Fishbaugh's Introduction to the Principles of Nature, Her Divine Revelations, and A Voice to Mankind. Edgar, reading the small type, with Hugh Lynn peering over his shoulder, had a queer feeling. "This sounds so much like me it gives me the creeps," he said. They looked at the steel engraving of Andrew which occupied the frontispiece, and read Mr. Fishbaugh's description of his appearance. "He is of ordinary stature, with a well-proportioned physical frame, possessing a bilious sanguine temperament. His features are prominent, and his head is of the medium size, and very smoothly developed, especially in the frontal and coronal regions. The base of the brain is small, except in there is a river the region of the perceptives, which are prominent. The head is covered with a profusion of jet-black hair. The expression of his countenance is mild, placid, and indicative of a peculiar degree of frankness and benevolence. And from his eyes beam forth a peculiar radiance which we have never witnessed in any other person." Edgar stared at the steel engraving again. Andrew was dressed in the style of the period, with a bow tie and a satin-lapelled jacket. "He's a nice-looking lad," he said. "Whatever became of him?" "His career is remarkable," Hugh Lynn said. "He continued to give readings for 35 years after the appearance of this 782-page book. Then he decided to study medicine. When he was 60 years old he received his degree and began to practice." Edgar was browsing through the book. How did he diagnose his patient's trouble after he became a doctor? He asked. "He made the usual inquiries," Hugh Lynn said. "But he got most of his information by placing the tips of his fingers against the palm of the patient's hand. Apparently the mechanism of his clairvoyance had changed. He no longer had to go to sleep to become sensitive. He touched the patient," Edgar said. "That is psychometry. He lived to be a very old man," Hugh Lynn said. "He was E.I.-4 when he died. This was his first book, but he wrote many more. They are out of print and their author seems to have been forgotten except by students of psychic phenomena and a small group of enthusiasts. But I understand the group is growing. Perhaps Andrew is in for a revival." Edgar went back to the steel engraving, staring at it. "There is a river. How did he do it?" he asked. "How often did he give his readings?" "Twice a day," Hugh Lynn said. "He used a magnetizer, that is, his conductor made passes at him, and he lay on his side while talking." Otherwise there seems to have been no difference between his method and yours. Edgar closed the book and ran his fingers over the worn, black cover. On the edge of the binding, in gold letters, was the legend, Revelations and C. by A. J. Davis the Clairvoyant. Almost 100 years ago some men had hoped to change the world with Davis and this book. Now the book was a collector's item, and Davis, though he had lived long, written much, and healed many, was all but forgotten. Well, at least you are not alone, Hugh Lynn said. You have Andrew and Victor the shepherd boy, and hundreds of others whose cases have been recorded. But Andrew is most important. For the scientists will have to pay attention when they find that another man did precisely what you are doing, right here in America. Edgar shook his head. If you had this FUOW and Victor the shepherd boy and me lined up in the same room, he said, and we all gave readings on the same case and agreed. And a doctor whom the scientists trusted went with them to the bedside of the sick man, and made a diagnosis, and said we were right. Do you know what would happen? The scientists would hang the doctor as a fraud and a fake and run us out of town. He handed the book to Hugh Lynn and went back to his fishing. Let Andrew and Victor and me rest in peace, he said. There is a river. In the fall of 1935, Edgar Evans Casey entered Duke University to take up the study of electrical engineering. Edgar and Hugh Lynn drove him to Durham, North Carolina, and, while they went to see Dr. J. B. Rhine of the Department of Psychology, who was then conducting his famous experiments in telepathy, they found him a pleasant person. He seemed interested in their story. The following March, Dr. Lucian H. Warner, acting as a special investigator for Duke, spent a week at the beach, listening to readings and getting a few himself. He was enthusiastic, and because of his report, Dr. Rhine in April secured a reading for his small daughter. He reported that the diagnosis did not seem to fit her condition, and his interest cooled. In June, Dr. Warner arranged for a series of readings to be given for Dr. Gardner Murphy of the Department of Psychology of Columbia University in New York. The subjects were to be examined in New York while readings were given on them at the beach. The names and addresses were to be sent to the beach by special delivery letter, leaving New York the day before the reading. 2 letters were sent, 2 readings were given. While Dr. Warner was taken ill and the work was turned over to one of Dr. Murphy's assistants, who sent no letters and made no reports on the readings given. I told you so, Edgar said to Hugh Lynn. Several of Dr. Warner's readings were on telepathy. He asked for a theory, and the information said it was a matter of soul development. That communication took place when 2 minds reached a state of consciousness above time and space. In such cases both perceived the same thing, with their subconscious minds, their individualities. One took it from his conscious mind, the other perceived it and transmitted it to his conscious mind. There is a river. Some were good receivers and poor senders. Some were good senders and poor receiver. People are timed through love and understanding, transmitted thoughts to one another. without conscious knowledge of it. Pathologically, the information explained, there were eugenics that produced in the blood plasm vibratory rates that made reception and sending possible. What would be the pulse rate, the heartbeat, the vibratory forces of the body influence itself? Those in which the ratio of cycles about each of the red corpuscles is 1 to 3. Those whose body vibratory forces are 87% O. Those having a pulse rate ranging the normal of 72 to 786 IO. In December 1935, the family had another brush with the law. They were visiting in Detroit, and Edgar gave a reading for one of his host's friends. The reading was for a little girl, but the girl's father had not been consulted in the matter. It was a violation of the association's bylaws, in fact, but the desire to help the child overcame this obstacle. The reading was given to the father, who took it to a doctor. The doctor disagreed on the treatment outlined. The father then went to the police. The family was arrested for practicing medicine without a license. The letter of the law had, in fact, been violated, but the law was reluctant in its prosecution. The charges against the other participants were dropped. Edgar was found guilty and paroled in custody of himself. There was no sentence or fine. The year 1935 was a lamentable one for the cases. In April, Gertrude's mother, Mrs. Evans, died. In November, Health Home Remedies was incorporated by some of the New York members of the association. Its function was twofold: to make available to members the mechanical appliances suggested so often in reading, and to manufacture There is a River, and attempt to market nationally some of the remedies, which over a period of years the information had specified. For certain troubles, an office was opened in Norfolk and Tommy House was made manager. The remedies selected for experimentation were Ipsab, A, specific for bleeding gums and pyorrhea, and Tim, an ointment for hemorrhoids. Readings were taken to Perfect commercial formulae for these, and Tommy took the products to doctors and dentists for testing. He built wet cell and radioactive appliances for people for whom they were prescribed by readings, and kept reports on the results. It was uphill work, and trouble came from an unexpected source. People receiving first physical readings which suggest the use of one or more of the products of health home remedies were inclined to suspect that it was all a racket. Health Home Remedies had all the appearance of a company set up to sell things recommended by the readings, at a profit to itself and the association. Toynbee discovered that the dental and medical organizations were in no hurry to give their approval to Ipsab and Tim, despite the long list of successful cases he had compiled. The corporation's funds dwindled, it sank into inactivity. The office was abandoned. Health Home Remedies became a sore subject with Hugh Lyam, who found himself forced to become a carpenter and chemist, building appliances for those who had to have them. The cellar of the Casey house became a laboratory. Tommy, who was preparing to return to Hopkinsville, showed his cousin how to build the batteries. The ingredients in this wet cell appliance cost a little. Over $18, he said. By the time you've shipped it, the cost is $19. If you get paid, the price is $20. You get $1, maybe, for your labor. There is a river, no wonder the corporation went broke, Hugh Lin said. Most people complain about the price, Tommy said. They say it's too high. I explain that we only make a few appliances, as a convenience to members, and the ingredients are expensive when bought in small quantities. What do clients say to that? Hugh Lin asked. They say the price is too high, Tommy said. Hugh Lin picked up a hammer. We're learning, he said. Learning what? Tommy said. Not to make mistakes, Hugh Lin said. He swung the hammer and hit one of his fingers. The years whirled on. Hugh Lin's files bulged with case histories, parallel studies in psychic phenomena, and research readings given for the study groups. Still the scientists showed no interest. Those who came to discuss, to argue, to learn were those already convinced of clairvoyance, of reincarnation, of karma. Some of these were psychologists by profession, a few were psychiatrists. But they were careful to keep such private behefts out of their profs. Signal theory and practice. The time isn't ready for people as a whole to believe such tilings, Hugh Lin told his father one day. But I'm convinced that it will arrive before too long. Our job is to be ready for it. Edgar agreed. When the time comes, they will approach us, he said. But remember this. We don't want people marching in here and saying, all right, I'm ready. Prove this thing to me. We want people who come in humility and with good manners, and say, TD like to know what this is. There is a river all about. Will you teach me? Our job is to have something ready for those people. Gradually Hugh Lin realized that the best evidence of the consistency of the readings lay in the records of families whose members for many years had used Edgar as a family doctor. Frank Moore's family was one of these. His niece, her husband, and their child had all had readings. Dave Kahn's family was another. His mother was kept alive, active, and without pain for 17 years after the readings, which prescribed her treatments all this time, had agreed with the doctors that she was suffering from an incurable disease. Dave's sisters and brothers, their children, and his, all were treated by readings. When Dave's youngest son fell and thrust the blades of a pair of scissors into his eye, the readings outlined treatments that were accurately and successfully followed, so that the cataract which formed was sorbed. Perhaps the best family record was that of the Houses. Carrie, Dr. House, and Tommy. Since the collapse of Health Home Remedies, Tommy had lived in Hopkinsville. He married a Virginia Beach girl, and a daughter, Corone, was bombed to them in September 1939. When Caroline was scarcely a year old, she pulled a pan of boiling water from the stove and emptied it over her. Tommy telephoned Edgar, and an emergency reading was given immediately. The treatments were followed and Caroline escaped without a scar and without damage to her eye, which first seemed badly affected. When she was almost 2, Caroline began to stammer, and had consistent trouble in digesting her food. A reading said she had been slightly injured in a fall. There was pressure in the area of the second, third, and fourth cervicals. Osteopathic treatments, massage, diet, and an aliment there is a river were prescribed. On September 30, 1941, Tommy wrote to Edgar, "Just a note to tell you that we received Caroline's reading and have started the treatments. Dr. B has had some trouble getting Caroline to be still long enough to give her a complete treatment, but nevertheless she is responding nicely thus far. Her stuttering is very much improved, but she is still bothered with a bronchial condition which causes considerable coughing. Her general condition has improved a lot." Another valuable source of evidence was the Daily Mail. An average day's mail, chosen at random from the files. For September 1941, produced letters from the following: a Yoim woman, in Washington, D.C., who was cured by the readings of lead poisoning caused by a depilatory, since removed from the market by the Bureau of Pure Foods and Drugs. She had been overworking, felt tired, and asked for a check reading. A woman in Pittsburgh who became interested in the work because of her studies of symbology. She obtained a physical reading and was writing to check up on the connections for a mechanical appliance, to be certain she had made Cleum correctly. The mother of a girl in Dayton, Ohio, who was cured of a complicated attack of arthritis, the treatments lasting 5 years. The mother, taking treatments for a certain ailment, reported general progress, but the recurrence of a specific pain. She quoted a letter from her daughter, who, away on a vacation, was frightened by a snake and jumped at least 8 feet. She also asked for a reading for her own mother, a woman of 80. The wife of a naval officer who met Edgar while she was living in Norfolk, and who had had some readings. Now, living in New London, she wrote to say she had formed a There is a River study group there and wanted a physical reading for a friend, a young lady in New Hampshire, who verified an appointment for a physical reading. She sent the name and address of the doctor who had agreed to cooperate in giving the treatments. A man in Darien, Connecticut, whose daughter had received a check reading a few days before. He reported that she was out of pain and improving rapidly. A man in Washington, D.C., who asked for a copy of the Congress Bulletin. His mother, for whom physical readings had been given, was feeling better. A young woman in Boston, Massachusetts, whose life reading had caused her to change careers, to her happiness. She asked for a life reading for a younger brother, who is all mixed up. A man in Delaware, Ohio, who had been referred to Edgar by a certain doctor. He asked for a physical reading for his wife. A couple in New York, who, on the verge of divorce, decided to give marriage another chance after a joint reading. They announced that a baby was on the way. A woman in Roanoke, Virginia, who had received her first physical reading. She reported her pleasure at the diagnosis. She had been suffering for years. The reading promised relief. A lady in Guilford, Connecticut, who asked for literature concerning the work. A man in Youngstown, Ohio, who cancelled an appointment meant for a physical reading and set a new date. There was also a telegram from Dave Kahn saying that he was in Washington on business and would be at the Beach Nest Day for a visit. The Daily Mail was Edgar's particular delight. It was "there is a river" proof, to him, that here a little, there a little, thought upon thought, line upon line, stone upon stone, his work did not fail, and that, as a radiog once told him, every sincere try is cointed to you for righteousness. This, widdy the work of the association, which makes it possible for those who are interested to participate in a spiritual labor, was the answer to his dreams. The city of healing had arisen, but it was built by hearts, not hands. He understood that the activities of the association have remained, in AC accordance with the plan adopted in 1931, unostentatious and unpublicized, even to the meetings of the Congress. Mem. Burrs raised a building fund for an awful BCE, library and vault, and these were erected in 1940. But they were incorporated into a single IMIT which was added to the Casey residence, and there is not even a sign to guide the visitor to them. The new building is a monument to the sincerity of the Tudor groups and the perseverance of the family in its fought to justify the readings. It was paid for by small butt-irons, nickels, dimes, and quarters, piling up over a long period of time. Some of the groups contributed their dues, other groups voted, as individuals, to give a percentage of their salaries and wages over a certain period of time. Edgar worked as a carpenter on the job. He hung the doors and windows, painted the exterior and interior, and laid the walk leading to the entrance. In the library, the local groups hold their meetings. One of these, which gathered on Tuesday nights, studied the Bible, with Edgar as teacher. It began with 6 students, and soon increased to 30. The association has an average membership of between 5 and 600. There is a turnover of about half of THERE is a river these from year to year. The other half remains as a solid basis for the association's research work, an audience for the case studies, pamphlets, bulletins, and the Congress Bulletin. A combined yearbook and record of the speeches and readings given at the annual meetings. There is a mailing list of several thousand people who are interested in anything that pertains to Edgar. They never forget him, apparently. Hugh Lyme discovered that among the 600 readings during a certain year, 43 were for people whose first reading had been obtained 5 years previously. 13 were for people whose first reading had been obtained 10 years previously. 6 were for people whose first reading had been obtained 15 years previously. And 8 were for people whose first reading had been obtained 20 years previously. One day late in the summer of 1941, Edgar received a telephone call from a man in New York. He did not recognize either the voice or the name. TM, the fellow in the bank in Dayton, who lent you $100 in 1924, the man said. Remember me now? Very well, Edgar said. Members of the association are drawn from all of the Protestant churches, from the Roman, Greek, Syrian, and Armenian Catholic churches, from the ranks of Theosophy, Christian Science, and Spiritualism, and from many of the Oriental religions. Acceptance of the readings, of course, implies acceptance of Christianity. Since the dominant note of all philosophic carat and moral disquisitions by the readings is th carat sierist paftem carat atli carat id carat of Manalgan. If it carat you a better member of your church, then it's good. If it takes you away from your church, it's bad. Edgar. There is a river told a new member of one of the study groups, who asked him whether a belief in the readings were JD affect her posy. Tyon as a member of one of the Protestant churches. Hugh Lin's program has not been entirely fulfilled. 2. Complete his evidence he needs sponsored readings on specific diseases and conditions, taking them generally, without reference to a particular patient. The budget of the Associa Tyon is so small that there is no margin for a series of readings on cancer, old age, heart ailments, asthma, etc. The readings must be sold to maintain sufficient income, only by selling such a series to a sponsor cot JD it be got. There are sponsors available. But in view of the hopelessness of the task of convincing doctors that a remedy suggested by the readings might be efficacious, they prefer to investigate such subjects as the life of Christ before his ministry, the symbology of the Book of Revelation, and the story of the world before history began. In the field of philosophy and metaphysics there is need for an extensive system of cross-indexing and checking. 2. Match what the readings say against what has been said by theologians, heretics, and teachers of religion and morals in all countries and at all times. The readings have been as democratic in this respect as in medicine. Wherever the law of 1 foot carat has been taught, their truth has lived. It is a stem set of ethics that emerges from the readings. No lukewarm embracing of theological virtues will satisfy them. They insist on perfection as the goal, and every misstep must be retraced, every injury undone, every injustice rectified. The newer, lenient interpretations of Christianity are not tolerated. Marriage, for instance, is treated as the Roman Catholic Church treats it. Though readings give a different reason for this attitude from that of the Church Fathers. Work it out now, say the readings, or you will have to meet it later. Only in extreme circumstances, Sunni there is a river law to those under which the Catholic Church grants annulment. Do the readings advise divorce? Then one of the parties is usually hopelessly at fault, while the other is bearing an unreasonable burden. Usually the reading will say, speaking of the one who is attempting to cooperate and hold things together, this has been met by the entity, the debt is paid. The art of living that has emerged from the readings has one great danger. It attracts only those who are ready to measure up to an ideal path of existence. But it offers these same people the temptation of a new religious organizer. Tyon, a new philosophical system. Against this the readings continually warn. The end toward which they should all Work is not something new and select, but something old and universal. This is the sum and burden of their labor. In the words of a reading, the ideals and purposes of the Association for Research and Enlightenment Incorporated are not to function as another schism or ism. Keep away from that'll, for these warnings have been given again and again. Less and less of person ality, more and more of God and Christ in dealings with the fellow man. To be sure, those phases of the activity of the association in the material plane must take concrete evidence and present concrete evidence of its being grounded in mental and spiritual truth. But not that it is to build up any organizer. Tie on that is to be as a schism or a cult or ism, or to build up money or wealth or fame, or position, or an awful BCE that is to function in opposition with any already organized group. How did thy master work? In the church, in the synagogue, in the field, in the lakes, upon the sands and the mountains, in the temple. And did he defy those? Did he set up anything different? Did he condemn the law even of the Roman, or the Jews, or the Essenes, or the Sadducees, or any of the cults or isms of the day? All he gave are as there is a river one under the law. And grudges, schisms, isms, cults, must become as naught, that thy guide, thy way, the Mars, yea even Christ, as manifested in Jesus of Nazareth, may be made known to thy fellow man. So, in DIY considerations, seek ye to know more and more of how each organization has its counterpart bodily, mentally, spiritually, and guidance may be given thee. Ye have an organization then with a physical being, with a mental being, with a spiritual concept. And only that, which is not merely idealistic but in keeping with God's, Christ's precepts, Jesus' anointings, may be that which may grow and become as a living thing in the experience, in the bodies, in the minds, yea, to the very awareness of the souls of men whom such a group, such an organization would serve. In the bodily functioning, then, the activities are to have due and proper consideration, to be sure. But let each phase of the work present how not only mentally but spiritually there is a grounding in truth, as is set forth in the Christ consciousness as exemplified by Jesus, as has been proclaimed by many of the saints of old. And then ye may be very sure that all of those influences from the spiritual realm are one. For whether it be as ye have seen at times, the Lord of thy way or the Christ himself as Jesus, or others be sent as an aid, depends upon whether ye hold that ideal at is one with thy universal truth for and to man. T. Hroff, the 1930s. Edgar Casey used quietly. Each day there were a few visitors, but they were part of the pattern. Without them he would have been lonely. Except for his journey to church each Sunday, and an occasional visit to the movies or the barber shop, he stayed at home working in his garden, fishing, or manufacturing something in the shop he built for himself behind Leary Garage. Each day he got up early and watched the sun rise out of the ocean. By its HHT he read the Bible. Usually he got his own breakfast, because he preferred his own version of Coffee hot, black, and strong. When weather permitted he worked outside until the mail came. His garden was extensive and he had a green thumb, anything would grow for him, in profusion. As a fisherman he was average. There was no magic in his rod. But the little lake behind the house was so well stocked with fish that he always caught a few. In late summer he engaged in his hobby of canning and pre-serving. By September the cellar shelves were crowded with There Is a River. The products of his art, by spring he had given most of them away. His hand was prodigal with those he loved. The families he held in highest esteem received an example of his ultimate skill, a jar of branded peaches. The morning mail arrived about 10, and when it was read the first reading of the day was taken. Afterward he worked at his typewriter, answering letters. Lunch was at 1. Usually it was a light meal. When it was finished he returned to the typewriter and stayed there until he was caught up with his correspondence. When the afternoon reading was finished, he went out to fish, to work in the garden, or to spend a few hours at his carpenter's bench. Dinner was at 6, and he ate heartily, finishing with a cup of the same hot, black, strong coffee with which he had begun the day. In the evening he read a newspaper, listened to the radio, and played double solitaire or Russian bank with Gertrude. At 11, they listened to the news bulletins, then they went to bed. When there were visitors he talked with them in the long living room that faced the ocean and ended against an old-fashioned fireplace. If they came with troubles, he listened, and did his best to give them hope, if they were to have readings. He told them stories that gave them faith in the information they were about to receive. They did not come in great numbers, but there was a steady trickle. The crip pled, the malformed, the defective, the hopelessly ill, the nervously sick. Often they returned when they were well, and those were the times when he was happiest. Then he listened to their stories of what the readings could do. A listener to all of these tales was Polly, an ancient parrot, full of wickedness and noise, who served a long term in the Navy and was given to Edgar by a friend. Polly was un. Martmally. Often she would punctuate someone's tall tale with TSK, TSK, or whistle a long sigh of relief when a There Is a River particularly tedious yam was ended. She was devoted to her master, and never interrupted him. Whistling was her accomplishment, she whistled at all sailors who passed, and at most pretty girls, sometimes, throwing in a leering halloo at the latter. She imitated any whistling she heard. Association with Hugh Lynn provided her with a large repertoire of popular songs, which she faithfully reproduced, off-key and out of tune. Finally she was allowed to leave her cage on the porch and enjoy the freedom of the living room. Once, on an autumn day, she flew into the large armchair by the fireplace and went to sleep. It was dusk, Edgar was upstairs, and no HHS were turned on. 2 men came to the door and asked to see Mr. Casey. They had heard something about him and wanted to find out exactly what he did. Gertrude showed them into the living room. They sat at the far end, which was still illuminated by daylight. At the other end, In the shadows, Polly was aroused from her nap by the noise. "What do you want?" she said sharply. Edgar came down the stairs just as the men were going out the front door. He reassured them, turned on the lights, and put Polly back in her cage. His other pets were 2 canaries, whose cage was in his awful BCE, far from Polly. They often sang during the readings, but it seemed to please Ratiba than disturb him. For a while, there was a big rabbit in the backyard, the gift of a friend, but one day a lame boy came to get a reaching, and when he left he carried the rabbit with him. Each summer Carrie came for a visit, and usually Tommy, his wife, and their daughter Caroline accompanied her. Edgar's sisters came, too, and friends in New York, Washington, Selma, and other places made a habit of spending their vacations at Virginia Beach. The squire died on April 11th. There is a river 1937, while on a visit to one of his daughters in Nashville, Tennessee. He was buried at Hopkinsville, by the side of his wife. After the funeral, Edgar went to the old farm for a visit and walked through the woods until he came to the bend in the creek at the willows. There he said a prayer for his mother and father. In June 1939, Edgar Evans was graduated from Duke. He accepted a position with the Virginia Electric Power Company in Norfolk and lived at home. During that summer, the family was happier, more united, than ever before. The association was growing steadily and gaining strength. Plans were drawn for a new wing for the house, to contain a library and a set of offices. Construction was begun in 1940 and completed in 1941. In September of that year the building was dedicated, and the first reading was given in Edgar's Offelbeis, a sunlit room overlooking the lake.